Hi, this is Jean Joe, broker and owner of Perisson Real Estate, and I'm back with another edition of Perisson Pulse. So today I'm going to be talking about legislation that's happening in California with regards to rental properties. So if you do own any investment property in California or are thinking of owning any, there are a lot of rules that you need to follow, and there are some changes that have been taking place and will be taking place. Before I go into today's topic, I did want to make a few announcements, just a reminder of our upcoming seminar on April 17th at 7 p.m. That will be in the Milkbray Recreation Center. And the topic is Mastering Financial Essentials in Retirement. And I've been speaking about this already, but our speaker, Dan Young, is a financial planner, and he'll be sharing a lot of insights in terms of how to think about your finances as you prepare for retirement or as you start retirement. Really looking forward to it. He's going to talk about things like Social Security, 401ks and IRAs, and how to plan accordingly. And so I hope that many of you will be able to join us for that. In addition, we have on May 15th, Investing Wisely in the Golden Years. So this has to do with different investment options that may make more sense for people as we're in our retirement years and growing older. What are some other investment options that might be an alternative to your traditional investing and as well as investment property as a whole? So with that, I'm just going to go straight into the topic for today. So one of the first ones that I do want to cover is AB 12. This has to do with security deposits, and this is already signed into law, has already been signed into law, and will be taking effect as of July 1st of this year. So what AB 12 says is that it says that security deposits can no longer be more than 1 month's rent for leases. Any leases that are signed on or after July 1st. Just as a reminder for those of you who are landlords or housing providers already, housing providers are allowed to charge up to 2 months worth of rent for security deposit for an unfurnished property, and then up to 3 months worth for a furnished property. With AB 12, and again, effective July 1st, that is no longer allowed. So whether furnished or unfurnished, security deposits need to be limited to that 1 month's worth of rent. Any existing leases will not be affected by this new law. So if you're going to make any changes or get a new tenant, get them in before July 1st. And any pet deposit needs to be within that total limit. So in the past, I know that sometimes people have done where you'll do a 2 months security deposit, and then add on a pet deposit or whatnot. So in this case, is no longer allowed. So you can have up to 1 month of rent for security deposit, and if you're going to do any pet deposit, it needs to be included in that 1 month's rent. So that's really the gist of this law. There are some exceptions to this law. And this is called for the quote unquote small landlords. So what that means is, first of all, the owner must be a natural person or a limited liability company, an LLC, consisting only of natural persons. So it cannot be a corporation that owns a property. It has to be a real person, natural person, or LLC that only has natural persons who own it. The other piece of that is that this owner can own no more than 2 rental dwellings, and that can contain no more than 4 units. So if you have a duplex and a triplex, for instance, that is 2 rental properties, right? Two dwellings. But the units in there, if you have a duplex, there are 2, and a triplex, there are 3. So if you add those together, that's 5. And so that actually exceeds that 4 unit total. So if you have, just as a natural person owns 2 duplexes, that would be okay. And then you would have that exception to this rule and would be able to, in that case, charge up to a value of 2 months rent of security deposits. Another thing to note in AB 12 is that if you are a service member, and I believe that means an actively serving service member, then landlords cannot charge more than 1 month of rent plus the first month's rent, and that plus first month's rent still applies for the others as well. But that limit is to 1 month's rent for a service member, even if the owner is a natural person and meets all of those exceptions. Another that's coming in has to do with no fault, just cause evictions. This will take effect April 1st of 2024, so coming up very soon. This has to do with if there are cases where it's not a fault of the tenant, but the landlord, the housing provider, wants to move into their own property. So if a landlord or a landlord's family members want to move into a property, the new law is now saying that the family must move in, or the landlord must move in within 90 days after the tenant has been evicted, and must live there for a minimum of 12 months. So previously it didn't have this timeline restriction to it, but now it's trying to make sure that you can't just have somebody move out and say, oh, I want to move there, I want my family members to move in there, and use as an excuse to have them move out and then actually not have that happen. So in order to keep that from happening, there is this there's this time restriction that says you do need to move in within 90 days. And on top of that, you have to live there for at least 12 months. To show that you're actually, in good faith, you're actually moving in there. It's not just an excuse to move in temporarily and then have a reason to kick out the tenants and then move out. So that's the gist of this, and that does take effect on April 1st. The next has to do with if you're evicting for the sake of a remodel. Then in that case, the remodel must be substantial enough that it would require the property to be vacant for at least 30 days. So it has to be something that's big. It can't be, I'm repainting or something like that. It has to be something that would require that somebody would not be able to live there for at least 30 days. The eviction notice would need to include a description of the work to be done, including copies of required permits. And that notice would need to also include a notice that says this third point: if this work is not commenced or completed, the tenant must be given the opportunity to re-rent the unit at the same rent and lease terms as when they left. So you cannot say, oh, I'm going to be remodeling, I'm going to do a total renovation, and then somehow change your mind. A tenant leaves and you change your mind, and it doesn't actually happen. Then the tenant has the right to be able to say, the tenant should be given that opportunity to be able to come back in at the same terms that they were at. So again, I think it's trying to make sure that housing providers or owners don't try to just use the remodel or the relocation as an excuse to get tenants out and then actually not do the work. So that's something, again, that will also be taking effect as of April 1st. So another legislation that just came through has to do with e-scooters and bikes. And so tenants will now be able to charge electric scooters and electric bikes in their apartments as long as the battery meets certain safety standards. And so this has to do with housing providers who may not have wanted their tenants to be charging e-scooters and bikes on their property because they're afraid of fire hazards and whatnot. So as long as the batteries meet certain safety standards, housing providers cannot restrict that from being able to happen. So moving on to proposed legislation. So one that is proposed is AB 2216, and this has to do with pets in rental properties. This actually prohibits a blanket pet ban in rental units. So keep in mind, this does not have to do with service animals and emotional support animals because they are not considered pets. So just one thing to really keep in mind. But this has to do with not just those animals, but all pets. The housing providers are not, if this goes through, then the housing providers would not be able to just say no pets in a property, in a rental unit. If the landlords need to restrict a pet in a rental unit, they would need to have reasonable reasons for doing so. I don't know what those reasonable reasons would be. Could have something to do with if maybe they're living on the property or you have a neighbor who may have an allergy, something to that effect. And in addition, this AB 2216 would only allow landlords to ask about pet ownership after the tenant's application has been approved. So you can't ask during the application process, can't say anything about it. But if after the fact, after you've already approved it, then you can ask if they're going to have a pet. there's not much more that you can do about it. So that's something that that would be included in there. Just to keep in mind with AB 2216, it actually has not been fully, all the language and the details have not been worked out yet. And so it's not something that's necessarily moving forward, but it's one of those pieces of legislation that is out there and being circulated. So just to be mindful of that. I know that there are a lot of people who care about their pets and think of them like family. And so it's a big issue, but at the same time, there are also the property owners who do care about their property and want to make sure and have some legitimate concerns about making sure that the property does not have additional wear and tear and damage because of possible pets on the property. Another that's being proposed is AB 2785, which has to do with application screening fees. Currently, existing law limits that fee to $30 per applicant and then authorizes the owner to do an adjustment every year for inflation. 2785, what that would do is to limit that fee to $50 per applicant, and then it actually removes the provision for inflation. So I think $50, it's pretty fair, and that's generally when we take applicants, we're screening applicants, the amount that is charged using the systems that we use is somewhere around $35 to $40. So I think $50 is not too small. But at the same time, the fact that it removes provision for inflation is a little bit of a concern, because inflation over the years, for now it may be okay, for maybe 5 years, for 10 years even, it may be okay. But I think any law where you have where there's a certain dollar amount and then you don't account for the fact that there is such a thing as inflation is a little bit concerning. So this is another one that's being proposed. I think the language of it is still being worked through, and it's not necessarily going to go through, but it is out there. The next one that I'm going to talk about is AB 2801. This has to do with your security deposit again, but now the back end of that of when a tenant moves out. So what this does is it limits the claims against the tenant to those necessary to restore the premises back to the same condition it was in, exclusive of ordinary wear and tear. So it makes sure that that security deposit has to only be to restore it to the general same condition that it was in. It also prohibits, though, a landlord from requiring a tenant to pay for any professional carpet cleaning or other professional cleaning services. This one is a little bit of a concern because I've seen cases where a tenant leaves and it really requires professional cleaning to take care of the carpet or just general cleaning. And so the thought of prohibiting a landlord from being able to use that security deposit to apply it to the need for professional cleaning services is a bit of a concern. So moving on with AB 2801, it addresses so there's supposed to be an itemized statement that when you go through a final walkthrough, the owner goes through a final walkthrough, they itemize what are the issues that were involved. So if later on there are, apart from that, anything that's discovered that needs to be repaired or cleaned, that cannot be included anymore because it was not in that itemized statement. A second, it would also require that in that itemized statement or with the itemized statement, there would need to be photographs justifying the cost of repairs, or cleaning. And then there would be specific copies of documents showing those charges that were incurred and deducted by the landlord to repair or clean the premises. So 2801, and again, that's something that's proposed, and I think the language is still being worked through, but it will be interesting to see how that gets fleshed out. I think it's fair on one hand that if an owner is going to deduct something from a security deposit for a tenant, that they should have some kind of a documentation and be able to show the justification for that. On the other hand, there's a little bit of a concern as to how restrictive that may be and how prohibitive, how difficult that would make it for an owner. So I think the language of that is something to be worked through, and it would be good to make sure that it is reasonable and not overtaxing to an property owner. And the last one that I'm going to cover here is what's been called or named the Justice for Renters Act. This will be on the November ballot, but there's been no number assigned to it as of the time of this recording. This is the third attempt to repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act, which was enacted in 1995. And what Costa-Hawkins did was to prohibit vacancy control. And then also it limited the power of local governments to be able to to enforce rent control on certain types of units, such as new construction or single family homes or condos. So that has been ever since Costa-Hawkins was enacted. There have been two attempts to be able to repeal this. We will be covering this in more detail, and I'll be talking about Costa-Hawkins in more detail later in the year as we get closer to the election in November. But just want to put that out there on your radar. And then finally, I did want to actually put a recommendation out there for one resource for those of you who have rental property in California. I would highly recommend Bornstein Law Group. Daniel Bornstein is very knowledgeable, and even if you don't need his services right away, if you go to his website, just Google Bornstein Law, you'll be able to see a lot of resources, just a wealth of resources for property owners, so that you can be well aware. There's a knowledge base. There's a lot of media that they have. And then definitely, if you have a case where you have a tenant and having issues and needing to evict them or whatnot, I would definitely highly recommend that you go to Daniel and his group. And he also has a YouTube channel, and I would recommend that if you do own rental property, that you look up this video from, again, Bornstein Law. And this particular video is called Landlording and Property Management in 2024. It's about an hour long and well worth it to talk about the legal landscape for rental properties. And it talks about where we are, where we're going, all the different things to expect. And I would highly recommend that. And then if you're tired of being a landlord or really nervous, I would recommend, I actually did a video a couple weeks back on the Delaware Statutory Trust, which is a different alternative vehicle that people can exchange their investment property and go into these DSTs. There's also a book by the speaker for this video. I did an interview with Jason McMurtry, and he wrote a book with his co-author Richard Gann, and it's called How to Retire from Being a Landlord. It's a pretty short book, and it talks about all the different costs and things to consider being a landlord, and then what are some other models instead of having the traditional investment property. What are some ways that you can be able to continue to invest in real estate, but without the headaches of being a landlord and worrying about tenant law, etc. So I would recommend these two resources, the Delaware Statutory Trust video that we did, as well as this book, How to Retire from Being a Landlord. So that's it for this week's edition of Perisson Pulse, and I hope that you found that to be helpful. I'm going to continue to try to put these out every week, and hope to build a library where any questions that you have in terms of real estate, you'll be able to look at our channel and find the answers. And if you don't, please be sure to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to do my research into it and to continue to put out videos there that could be helpful to the community. So here at Perisson, we're all about abundance and really wanting to share with others of the abundance that we've received. And I just feel really blessed to be able to even do this. If you do know anybody who is thinking about buying or selling in the near future, please, I hope that you'll keep us in mind. And please be sure to subscribe and to check back again for our future videos. Thank you very much and have a great weekend.